Ok, muito obrigado pela simpática apresentação e obrigado, antes de mais, pelo convite. So, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Actually, we were discussing at coffee break with some colleagues that it seems that for some of us, it's the first time that we are actually physically in the Faculty of Law, which is interesting. I mean, it's no... Okay, so I have like what, 30 minutes or a bit less, let's say? 25. Now it's a scarce good time. Yeah, I got a haircut of 5. Okay, so this is joint work with João Jales, who was a colleague of me while I was for many years at the European Central Bank, and now João is at the IMF. We are just trying to finalize this, so any comments that you might have are most welcome. This is a bit different from what my previous colleagues presented, but fully in line. So what we have in here is a bit of a set of outputs from a research paper, and the topic is, I would say, fitting nicely with the previous presentation. So we have sovereign yield spreads, 10-year sovereign bonds in the euro area. We have determinants of those bonds, and then we have two added values on this piece of research. One is trying to understand if some of the determinants of those spreads are time varying. Did they actually change their relevance through time? So that's, let's say, added value number one. I mean, we have this ongoing. And added value number two, we hope, is what about these measures of programs and quantitative easing that the ECB has implemented in the past years? Had this any impact at all on spreads? So that's, I would say, the second added value, and this is very, very simple. So let me try to show you a bit. I have, I think, 15 slides, so this is perfectly fine. I mean, there is no stress. So it was very nice to see the presentations before the one that I'm doing, because they know more about this than I do, and they presented nicely the programs of the ECB and so on. So I'm just fitting a bit the presentation. We are using a time span between 1999 and 2016, so this will be monthly data, and we do have a lot of information about these programs and these so-called non-conventional monetary measures from the ECB. And the idea is, well, what can we learn? Do we get any feedback from these measures vis-a-vis sovereign yield spreads, yes or no? That's basically the main question. And this is actually included in a broader research that we are doing, financed by the Portuguese Science Foundation, but that's another story. So this is one output. So this is a bit what has been done in the past. I mean, I can send you the slides or the draft paper afterwards if you are interested. So I have 2 slides on previous literature. Doing what? Exactly assessing to what extent we can pinpoint a couple of key determinants for 10-year spreads. And just reading very quickly over the literature, what we find is that indeed there are relevant determinants, like for instance macro determinants, fiscal determinants, financial market volatility, liquidity. Those are there usually as relevant determinants of the 10-year bond spreads. But in addition to that, what we can find from previous studies is that to some extent there seems to have been a kind of splitting between spreads in a set of countries in the euro area, let's call them core countries, and another set of countries, let's call them non-core countries, in the sense that the spreads have moved differently, notably after 2009, 10, 11. There is a break there. So this kind of comes up in the literature. This is interesting. And in addition, and this is now the last line in there, we are now moving in terms of our research agenda to the contagion issue, which is not addressed here at all, but there seems to be also a bit of contagion in the 10-year spreads. And this is something that we are already starting work, but will not be addressed here. So bottom line from the literature, yes, there are key determinants explaining sovereign bond yields. Yes, they are relevant in the euro area. Yes, there is a split between core and non-core economies regarding the developments of the spreads and how the determinants are perceived by markets. And yes, there was probably some kind of mispricing for some of those countries / spreads before the crisis. So this is what we can read from the literature. Now, what are we actually looking at? So this is a chart similar to the ones that were already presented, and these are indeed yields, let's put it like this, and you have spikes, and the spikes are focusing on that crisis period. So as before, we can look at lines very tight together, flagging, let's see, let's put it like this, flagging that, well, these things are similar because they have basically the same yield in the market, so they are similar bonds, which is then not true after the crisis. And this is a bit of a change. Now, it was very nice to see the presentations by Fritz and Francesco, you know, all these tables giving a bit more information than I might be able to do here about the interventions of the ECB, when they started, the amounts and so on. I have a couple of tables here as well. So basically we have in the past interventions via purchasing programs, liquidity provisions and so on, and we actually have the data for that, although it takes a lot of time to collect it, but we collected that. So we have all that data in our database. So the next step would be, well, let's use it. Let's try to see some results from this data. So these programs, as it was mentioned before, let's call them non-conventional instruments, non-conventional monetary policy. So this is after 2009 and 10, and this is just a diagram explaining a bit some of the main programs. And actually the ones that we are going to, we used the data from all of them, but we are focusing a bit more on the CVPP because it's a bit longer, we have more information, and we are trying to assess whether or not this is relevant. Okay, so this was somehow addressed in the past presentations. Now, what do? There is a bit of work here trying to assess what are the main determinants. So there is a bit of model selection. So is industrial production relevant? Is debt to GDP relevant? Is volatility in capital markets relevant? We need to select the ones that we think that makes sense. That's step number one. And then what I think it's interesting is to actually have these so-called time-varying coefficients. So, for instance, the bid-ask spread. The bid-ask spread is obviously an important determinant of 10-year sovereign yields. If a bond is less liquid, then probably the yield in secondary market will be higher. Okay, we accept that. But is this link always the same in terms of magnitude, or did it actually change? For instance, was liquidity more important after the crisis, or it was important as usual? You see the point that we are driving here. And then we would like to see, so can we actually pinpoint the development of these determinants? So this is, in a nutshell, what we are trying to do. So I only have 2 slides with these equations, so do not panic. So the baseline is, of course, we would like to see what are the determinants of the 10-year sovereign yield spreads. We want to assess this. So this is a panel framework. I will not go into the details. And we will have a set of determinants. Now, one interesting point in here is this coefficient beta I. So this would then be the impact, or let's say the estimated impact of a determinant, let's say the bid-ask spread. The bid-ask spread has an impact on the spread. and we will model it with this beta coefficient. Fine. That's the baseline. Okay, but in addition to that, we might think that this is not time invariant. This might change through time. So for instance, let's think of another variable, the level of government debt in a certain country as a ratio to GDP. So this would give you an idea of the fiscal developments on an economy. So did this become more relevant in terms of explaining the spreads, or nothing changed? It was the same thing. Okay, then you can actually double check what was the development of this beta coefficient linking changes on the debt to GDP ratio to the spreads. Was it going up? Was it going down? Nothing happened. So that's, I think, I'm trying to convey the message here. Don't pay attention to all the stuff in the slide. I mean, this is just the baseline idea. So we have done that. That's a lot of work, actually. And in addition, what do we think is relevant? Reading the literature, all the results available. So we have measures on financial risk, bid-ask spread, which is a bit of a proxy for the liquidity of these securities in the market. Credit risk, macro and fiscal variables may play a role. For instance, it's not, a country that has a debt to GDP ratio of 20 or another that has a debt to GDP ratio of 150, markets probably see them as different things. So is this relevant? Real exchange rate. Something which is actually quite interesting is, and I have an interesting slide for Portugal, I think, I hope you find it interesting, is the sovereign ratings. So these determinants also most of the times show up as relevant in explaining the development of the spreads. Just as a footnote, okay, yeah, you are saying that ratings are important to explain the spreads, but then spreads are also important to explain the ratings, so there is, yeah, we take care of that. I mean, we can take care of that econometrically, so there is no endogeneity issue here. Now, final line in there is, what about the holdings of the ECB of those securities, notably sovereign debt? Is it relevant? Can we find something? So this is the setup, let's put it like this. You can just interrupt me if something is bothering your mind and you want to say something, don't be shy. Okay, I have 3 tables, no stress. Table number 1 is just the baseline. We are just saying, so what actually can we learn? What have we learned? And what we have in here, if you focus on the yellow part, we are just saying, well, we are explaining the spreads in the overall sample, 1999, 2016, what is going on? And we do find interesting results in terms of the baseline. Let me just probably focus on one, as an example, one fiscal variable, which is the one that I put in there. What is that? That's expected debt Germany. What is that? That is the difference between the forecasted debt to GDP ratio of Portugal and the forecasted debt to GDP ratio of Germany. So the Commission comes up with these forecasts, we get them all, and we have the idea that, oh, look, these guys, let's say Italy or France or Spain, are diverging the forecast in terms of the one for Germany, or they are closing in. So this is a possible measure. And we do see that there is a positive impact on the spreads, in the sense that if you, let's put it like this, misbehave more vis-à-vis the average, you will be penalized in terms of higher spreads. Now, another thing which is there, it's the bid-ask spread. Again, this is an expected result. I mean, more illiquid securities will have to have higher spreads in the market. So this is also expected. The same for this measure of volatility, international risk, the VIX. So this is, I would say, in line with a lot of results that we do have in the previous literature. So it's interesting to get this. Table number 1. Okay, now moving to another set of determinants, which is the sovereign ratings. And before that table, I thought of doing this chart. We actually have charts for all the countries, but it doesn't matter. We are in Portugal, so let's take a look at Portugal. What is this? The red line is essentially the 10-year sovereign bond yield of Portugal. I mean, this was daily date. I mean, don't pay attention to the time frequency now. And what are the other lines? The other lines are basically, you know, the notches of the ratings from the three main rating agencies. And let's say before 2008, 2009, the line is like this, so the yield is like this, kind of flat, and the ratings were over there in the top, okay? So that was like a double A for all the rating agencies. This is the case of Portugal. Okay, then you have the crisis, and then you have huge downgrades. You see the lines going down. At the same time, there is no causality here. This is just a chart. So at the same time, the yield is going up the roof. Then the yield comes down again. And then the ratings kind of, you know, they are a bit sticky on the way up. They kind of stay there, right? So this is just an illustration. And this is very similar to a lot of other economies in the euro area. So bottom line is the rating important to explain the sovereign bond yields? Yes, probably it is. But this already flags two pieces of information. There seems to be a bit more stickiness in terms of upgradings than downgradings. This is important. And this links to the idea, and this is a bit more psychology. I sometimes give the example, well, we probably pay more attention to bad news than to good news. Because, I mean, good news, well, good news. But then bad news, we really are upset. For instance, if you walk on the street and you find a €5 bill, you are happy. You find €5, but I mean, it's not going to change your life. You don't care. Then you go to a coffee and you thought you had a €5 bill to pay for the coffee, but then you don't find it. You basically lost the €5 bill. You are really upset. The magnitude of your loss and the magnitude of your gain is the same, but you are probably more upset by the fact that you lost the €5. So on the ratings, I would say that this is probably similar in terms of the news up and down. Okay, moving. So what is the point of this table? The top part is the same, doesn't matter now, but the shaded part is again what? Okay, how are the changes in the ratings impinging on the spreads? And if you look at the table, all those coefficients are negative, right? Meaning that if you have an upgrade of the rating, the spread goes down. If you have a downgrade of the rating, the spread goes up. This is the overall conclusion. And this is also true for the outlooks for the three rating agencies. Again, this is the full period. We are talking about the full period. Okay, so this is an interesting result that kind of adds to the baseline. We don't have it here, I don't have it here, but if you actually split the period of analysis before and after the crisis, before and after the ECB starts buying bonds, you might get a bit of a different result in the sense that probably not a lot of activity before, but a lot of activity after the crisis, which kind of makes sense, I would say. Now, moving to one of the pieces of information, I mean, this was also reported from other slides that colleagues presented before, so we just collected all the amounts of the interventions by the ECB, and we made plots of a couple of them. And the red line is again what? The spread of the 10-year bond in Portugal vis-a-vis, just, I mean, it could be any other, but we are here now in Lisbon. So you see, this thing goes up as again, in the previous slide, then goes down. Again, there is no causality here, I'm just pinpointing that you do have a bit of building up in terms of the interventions of the ECB. And those are the amounts there. For instance, the SMP, the CBPP, so they were there, right? And this is now the next step in our analysis. Is this relevant in addition to the other key determinants? Is this kind of adding up any additional explanation? So we have too many stuff, so this is the only table that I'm presenting. And so the top part is again, you know, volatility, exchange rate, expected debt, and so on. And then the parts in green and in kind of orange, dark orange, let's put it like this. What do we have in there? Those are growth rates of those measures, right? They're just growth rates. So we have the S&P and the CBPP. And it seems, looking at the results, that there is a bit of downward effect on the yields. And this is not the yields of Portugal or France, this is a panel. So this is for all the euro area, the 10 euro area countries that we are actually using. So one tentative conclusion would be that to some extent, the fact that you had a couple of non-conventional measures, or the ECB providing demand for these bonds, somehow probably in the market pushed prices up and yields down. This would be a conclusion. Now, from this, we cannot say whether this was a successful result or not. I'm just, from a research point of view, highlighting the result. I can make a couple of policy points later, which of course are my own views, and since I no longer have an institutional affiliation to an organization, I can say whatever I want. Nobody cares, right? So, and this is good. Okay, so, final point. I have 5 minutes, but it's fine. Final point. What about the time varying profile of these determinants? Is this there? Okay, so let's focus on the top left chart. I mean, it's just an example. This is the VIX. This is the measure of volatility in financial markets. Okay, more volatility, spreads go up, this is perfectly fine, but notice there seems to be something there. These are interquartiles, this is the, so focus on the median, for instance. There is something there, right? During the crisis, these things become a bit more strong in terms of the impact, which is interesting. Now, let's take a look at 2 countries. So, let's take a look, which country is this? Italy. This is by accident. Okay, Italy. So, what actually happened in the case of Italy? We are talking about spreads, 10-year spreads, and we are talking about determinants. So, for instance, again, the top left chart is what? Is the difference between the forecasted debt to GDP ratio of Italy vis-a-vis the forecasted debt to GDP ratio of Germany. So if these things go like this, or if, you know, Italy goes up more than Germany. And you see again around 2011, 12, 13, this is a positive coefficient, but it becomes a bit more relevant in that period, probably because this was then more priced by markets than before. Again, you have something in there in terms of the CBPP and the LTRO, but in there it's a bit the opposite impact on the yields, right? The other chart in there is for the ratings, which is again interesting, but not very surprising. So let me I have something on Portugal. I'm going to skip Portugal because I wanted to show France. France, basically we are talking about the 2 big economies after Germany, and notice that these are spreads vis-a-vis Germany, so we don't have Germany here. I mean, this is very similar. It's kind of the same thing. And these are different economies, France and Italy. And you do have these time-varying coefficients changing magnitude and relevance, and pinpointing to the fact, first, that during the crisis they were priced by markets, and probably some of these ECB interventions were also more relevant during that period. And notice, those 2 charts on the right, they seem to, you know, fade away, right? The LTRO and the CBPP, it's kind of, they seem to lose a bit relevance towards the end, which is also interesting. Okay, so I'm concluding, that's the conclusion here. This is what we did, point 1, and I would say that the relevant output of this study is, first, we do seem to have changes in the pricing in markets of some of the determinants of the 10-year bond spreads. Second, it seems that those interventions by the ECB might have helped containing the spreads. Now, then there is a question. Okay, and if they end this? That's point 4. We don't really know what is going to happen in the future, whether or not the monetary authority is going to continue this process. And before really stopping, I would like to make a small comment on the things that were said already, notably regarding whether or not fiscal policy should have coordinated better with monetary policy. Now I can say these things, right? I can talk about this. So the point is very simple. I mean, look, before the crisis, you had a lot of countries that on a fiscal perspective probably could have done things differently. And if they have done things differently when you were probably in good times, you might have ended up, I mean, you would arrive to 2009, 10, 11 in better shape. This is just factual. I mean, look at the cases of Italy, Belgium, Spain in the 90s. From a fiscal point of view, they have managed through those periods to provide primary surpluses. I mean, yeah, but no, look, those are the numbers. I mean, what they did, we would have to take a look. But they did that, and the debt ratio came down. That was before the crisis. So that's an indication. So probably one should be careful with that. Okay, thank you very much.